Hello, welcome to Japan Korea MINIPEDIA. This is the second session, and today we will discuss geography of the Korean Peninsula and the Japanese Archipelago. I am going to upload this show on every Tuesday and Friday, so if I succeed, we shall have more than 100 shows per year. So I'd like to have your continued interest and support for this program. Now let's take a very quick look at the geographic feature of the Korean Peninsula and the Japanese Archipelago. First of all, in terms of the positioning, the Korean Peninsula is attached to the Eurasian continent. On the other hand, Japanese Archipelago is separated from it, of course, and looks toward the Pacific Ocean. These features, these conditions lead to the second important element in terms of conflict. Now today, Korean Peninsula, including North and South Korea, still have a conflict with China on the territoriality of the sea between the Korean Peninsula and the Chinese continent. The formal name of the sea is Yellow Sea. The yellow, the word comes from the fact that this sea looks, kind of yellowish, not blue, because the sea is quite shallow relatively. And also it contains lots of plankton and dust and other elements, chemical elements, because the rivers flow from the China and also Korea to this small sea. So in a sense, the sea is very thick or even contaminated. So it looks yellow, not ocean blue. Now, between the Korean Peninsula and the Japanese Archipelago, we have this piece of, kind of rectangle sea. Koreans call it East Sea because it is in the east side of the Korean Peninsula. On the other hand, Japanese call it Sea of Japan. So even today, South Korea and the Japanese government are quarreling in the international organization about the formal naming of the sea. And another conflict is going on at this top right upper corner. We have another conflict location. There are four small islands, the chain of islands between Hokkaido, which is the northern part of Japan, and Russia. So there is a conflict going on between Russia and Japan over four islands territoriality. And the third one, which is very important, and we will discuss later in detail. But if you look at the map very quickly, the plains where people gather and live, the settlements are on the left side of the Korean Peninsula. So obviously, Pyongyang, the capital city of North Korea, and Seoul, the capital city of South Korea, all on the left side, which is also important that from the past, really centuries ago, since a long time ago, the elite, the ruling elite of Korean Peninsula were mostly born and lived in the western part of peninsula. So they naturally have a tendency to look toward China as sources of, civilization, technology, learning, etc. Also, that means there are political conflicts between the, dynasties of China in the past and Korean dynasties because of that proximity and the fact that ruling elites are on the west side of Korean Peninsula. On the other hand, if you look at the Japanese archipelago, on the top middle part of the right side is a chunk of land in a brown color. That is actually Great Kanto Plain, which contains Tokyo. And also, if you go down, we have Osaka and Kyoto area, which is also the plain on the right side. So, in contrast to the Japanese Korean peninsula, the ruling elites settlements are on the east coast. That means naturally they look toward the ocean. So, as we'll discuss later, Japanese civilization has been started and been led by the relation between the Western powers that start from the ports on the east coast. On the other hand, on the west side of Japanese archipelago are really high mountains. So in the past, where human beings didn't have a really good means of transportation, going to Korean Peninsula over the mountain was almost unthinkable task in the past. So naturally, until the modern period, the relationship between the Korean Peninsula and the Japanese archipelago were very limited. Now, so if you contrast the Korean Peninsula and Japanese archipelago, the entire area of Japanese archipelago is far larger than Korean Peninsula. Japanese archipelago has 380 square kilometers, which is about the size of state of California. And while the Korean Peninsula, with South Korea 100 square kilometers and North Korea 120 square kilometers, altogether 220, are actually smaller than Japanese archipelago. The Korean Peninsula is about the size of state of Pennsylvania. And as I said earlier, lay of the land. If you look at the lay of the land, the west side is low and east side is high. On the other hand, Japanese archipelago forms the feature of high western side and low eastern side. So again, as we discussed, settlements are on the west side in the Korean Peninsula, but in Japan it is on the east side. Now, we will discuss this later, but there are many islands. Korean Peninsula has about 3,348 islands. I mean, there could be more if you probe further with a better technology. But Japanese archipelago is close to 7,000 islands, 6,852 officially today. And recently, this exclusive economic zone is very important notion in terms of nationhood, in terms of national interest on the ocean. Japan is really huge, has a huge economic zone that is about 447 square kilometers. On the other hand, the EG of the Korean Peninsula, Korea, is almost 1/10 of the Japanese. So the Japanese archipelago really forms a oceanic power in the Far East. Now, I'd like to take a look at this topography again. As we said, human settlements are mostly on the west side in the Korean Peninsula. On the other hand, human settlements are on the east side in the Japanese archipelago. So if you look at Pyongyang, the capital city of North Korea, and Seoul, South Korea, both are on the west side. And from there to Chinese continent is very easy. Okay, even in the past, on a sailboat, you can go to China quite easily. But on the other hand, 100 or 200 years ago, going over Japan was almost impossible physically. On the other hand, Japanese major settlements are on the right side. And plus, we have this particular condition in Japan, that is, as we discussed, Japanese are really oceanic power. And on the right side of Japanese archipelago is a huge, largest ocean in the world. There's a Pacific, and there's green line that shows a sea current. It's called a black current or kuroshio in Japanese. The kuroshio actually runs in parallel with the major Japanese cities of Kyoto, Osaka, and Tokyo. That means even in the past, even when we have a really limited shipbuilding technology, on a sailboat, Japanese could travel to the west on from the east coast, because if they ride a black current, they can sail to Western countries. So this condition really has a huge impact on the formation of and development of Japanese civilization, which is quite contrast to the Korean case. Now, let's discuss about this black current kuroshio more. Okay. Now, if you look at this Pacific Ocean, the circling kuroshio starts from the north equatorial current, then goes to toward China, Eurasian continent. But before reaching Chinese Sea, it turns to the north, so that circles to North Pacific current and come back to equatorial current. So this actually has a huge impact on the Japanese side. Particularly, Japanese civilization actually was initiated by the visit or invasion of Western forces. So Westernization of Japanese culture was far earlier than the Korean case. Here, if you look at that map on the left, we had a really age of discovery, or the age of sail, in the 15th through 17th century, where great sailboat fleets from Portugal, then Spain, then Netherlands and England, they all sail. They want to sail to China. To go to China, they sail down and circled around the African continent, then go through Southeast Asia, then go to China. Right at that time, Japan was not really known as much as China. So in many cases, the arrival of Western ships, sailboats, were quite accident rather than being planned. Anyway, so Japanese really door opening and the start of civilization was by the accidental arrival of the Western ship, first Portuguese, then Spanish, and they all actually ride the black current. They, for instance, the Western ships wanted to go to Shanghai or Beijing. Then, before entering South China Sea, if they at that time, ocean technology was not really sophisticated, so they, not knowing the situation, they ride the black current. Then they actually get to sail towards Japan by accident. So this was, in a sense, the initiation of Japanese Westernization, which later meant really a civilization. So on the right side is actually Western, Portuguese ship, reached the Japanese coast, and Japanese people came out and really look at them. And then amid that great transformation of age of discovery, age of sailing. Something really important happened in year 1543, that a Portuguese ship which was going to China arrived by accident in an island called Tanegashima, which is really southern tip of Japanese Kyushu Island. Tip of southernmost island in the Japanese archipelago. Then in that ship were Portuguese sailors, but they were equipped with rifles, Western rifles. So that year was actually the arrival of Western guns, in a sense Western firepower and military technology in the Japanese archipelago. So on the left side is called the Japanese samurai, now equipped with not with Japanese samurai swords, but by really guns, and that made Japan build in a sense modern army system before any Asian countries. So that led to a major war, major invasion by the Japanese army equipped with rifles to at that time Joseon, Korea. And initially Japanese army were actually absolutely upper hand, because they were fighting with Korean soldiers of Joseon dynasty who are merely equipped with arrows and swords. So victory was in a sense guaranteed for the Japanese soldiers equipped with these rifles. So in a sense, that accident of arrival of Portuguese ship with guns actually allowed Japan to have a military superiority over Japan, Korea, and then later to China. So, broadly speaking, that accident was the seed of Japanese military superiority over other East Asian countries. That even led to, Japanese militarism in the 20th century. And very interestingly, actually today Japan's only pad for rocket launching is at the same Tanegashima Island. So on the right side is current Japanese rocket launch site on the Tanegashima. So they shoot H-2 series of rockets today. So in a sense, today we talk about Japanese, notion of oceanic country, Kaiokoka, a lot. But if you look at this upside down map, we really find interesting things. First of all, Korean Peninsula is in a sense confined by a narrow sea circled by the China, Russia, and Japanese archipelago, and also the Taiwan. So any dynasty, any regimes in Korean Peninsula never claimed a seafaring nation or the sea-going, ocean-going army or country. But in contrast, Japan was really originally conditioned to become an oceanic country because they face a huge Pacific Ocean, and there is no obstacle, in the entire Pacific Ocean. And they have this in the Sea of Japan or East Sea, with bordered by Korean Peninsula and the actually southeastern part of the Russia. So in this Sea of Japan or East Sea, there were many conflicts with Korean and also Russian countries, particularly Korea. Still today, as we discussed earlier, Japanese and Korean governments are fighting over the official name of the sea still in the international organization. So again, if you look at that Yellow Sea between Korean Peninsula and China, the color is kind of almost white. That means it's not really deep enough. So it's a narrow sea and it's quite contains many elements, chemical and biological elements. Also, China and Korea are claiming their own notions of economic zones which overlap in the middle. So even though the conflict over EEZ overlapping between Korea and China were not really officially filed with the international organization, because this is so important, there would be a potential possibility, the room for conflicts with North Korea, South Korea, and China in the future. Now, let's take a look. Let's take another contrast between Korean Peninsula and Japanese Archipelago. First of all, about 70% of Korean Peninsula and the Japanese Archipelago are mountains. So they are really mountainous countries. But the mountains, contents are very much different. If you look at the bottom of the page, Korean mountains are not really high. Mountains whose peaks are higher than 2,000 kilometers are about 57 in the Korean Peninsula, and most of them are in the North Korea. So that means in South Korea alone, the highest mountain is 1,947, less than 2 kilometer height, which is Halla Mountain, which is the middle of the Jeju Island. And in the North Korea, we have a Baekdu, that is a Chinese character, white head, Baekdu Mountain, which is 2,744 meter. But if you go to Japanese Archipelago, officially today's count is 826 mountains that are higher than 2,000 kilometers. That means Japan is really mountainous, really. So if you go to Japan, we have this, names of Alps, North Alps, South Alps. At first, you will be amazed by that, borrowing of European term. But if you really go there, you will think that they are really, high mountains in the European, Alps regions. So particularly Fuji Mountain in the middle of Japanese archipelago is 3,776 meter highest. Also, it looks very, really triangular, a mountain with, snow at the top of the top throughout the year. So this mountain is very, not only highest, very sacred mountain for the Japanese people, and being the object of many, novels and, movies and other stories. So this, on the left side is Baekdu Mountain, the highest mountain in the North Korea. This actually is at the border between China. So China can also claims the territoriality over this mountain, but Koreans believe that this is really a sacred mountain of the Korean Peninsula. Actually, it has a huge pond the top of it, and the right side is Fuji, Mount Fuji, which is a very sacred entity, object of really almost worship for Japanese people. Is snow around year because it's really very high, close to 4 kilometers. Now, another important element, I think this is very important, and we'll talk more later, but I told you that 70% of mountains in the Korean Peninsula are actually, lower than 2,000, almost 2,000 kilometers. That means even before we have horses and automobiles, people can move around. I mean, I go to mountain from time to time, but a mountain up to, let's say, 500 meters, you can go over very easily. So in the Korean Peninsula, except for the eastern side, many mountains are actually not high enough to people give up to go over. So that means there are many wars between towns and region. So in a sense, the powerful military elite group could take a big chunk of land in the Korean Peninsula. So eventually, in the mid to pre-modern period, Korea basically had a three kingdom system. Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla. Even though the region called the Kaya between Baekje and Silla are object of controversy. But please remember that basically in the past, in the Korean Peninsula, there were three kingdoms. But map on the left side is actually, quite old. That is the map when the Goguryeo was the most actually powerful in the past. So today's Manchuria was actually under the rule of this, Goguryeo political elite. But now the current actually, Korean Peninsula is, North Korea actually is the, a former Goguryeo, but which is far smaller than this, this Korea of 5th century. But Baekje is today's, and Silla are today's South Korea, plus the middle part of Korean Peninsula are current South Korea. Okay. On the other hand, if you look at this map of Japanese archipelago at the 8th century, you have 66 feudal states. If you are familiar with Japanese, literature or movies, you will see many movies with, this, triangular-shaped Japanese castles where lords live. So quite, like a, middle age European society, there are many feudal lords who had the sovereignty over some size of a piece of land. They have a castle. So these castles are called at the time, because Japanese people use the Korean Chinese characters. They call it kuni. Kuni means state. So sometimes if you go to Japan, nowadays, some people ask you, where are you from? Then they will say, Okuni wa doko desu ka? That's literally, which country are you from? Here, country doesn't mean foreign country, but that state, feudal state are you from? So Japanese society, Japanese archipelago actually has a long tradition of, dozens of many, feudal states. Today, we have 47 prefectures, right? So, and each here, feudal state has the lord living in the castle, and they had a name. So even though we don't go into those Chinese characters, in modern Japanese trains, in so many things, we have names using those old feudal state names. So Japanese really similar to, in a sense, Middle Age Europe compared to Korean Peninsula. So Well, let's summarize in three statements of today's session. The Korean Peninsula and the Japanese Archipelago make a really stark contrast regarding geographical composition and the formation of human settlements. The western side of the Korean Peninsula has flat lands, metropolises including Pyongyang of North Korea and Seoul of the South Korea are located on the west coast. And the Japanese archipelago contains far more high mountains, which facilitated the formation of many feudal states in the past. Major metropolises of Japan, for example, Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto, are located on the east coast. Okay, this is for it today. Well, your continued support and interest will be very much appreciated. And if you have any question or points to make, please contact me at the email address. Thank you very much.